Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to another Watchman Newscast live stream. I'm just looking at our chat down the side of the screen of my laptop. We've got an active chat already. Thousands of people will be joining us before this live stream is over. We're going until 5 p.m. EST, Eastern Time. But I see a commenter, Eddie K, who says, I loved the 80s. Hey, so did I. My wife and I talk about it a lot. My brother, we laugh about it. We had great times. I was a child of the 80s and the 90s. But was in grade school throughout the 80s. Man, different times today, right? But I'm with you there, Eddie K. So I just smiled when I saw that. We've got people from all over the world. We have from Downingtown, PA, my native Pennsylvania. I'm a Philly native, of course. Welcome. From the Philippines, from West Texas, Southern California, Ontario, Canada. Already, we've got a pretty active chat here. And again, we'll have thousands with us before the live stream is out. Welcome, welcome. Hey, we've got a lot to talk about, folks. I know I say that every week. We've got a lot to talk about in these prophetic Bible times in which we're living. But truly, today, Wednesday, May 3rd, we've got a whole lot to talk about. Let's start with Russia claiming that there was a Ukrainian assassination attempt against Russian President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin involving drones. We'll talk about that. We need more details there. But Russia is claiming, yes, this happened. It was an attempt on Putin's life. Ukraine is saying, no, it's not us. It was a trick played by Russia to justify them taking further action against Ukraine. So we're going to break that down because that obviously, folks, could have major ramifications. I believe it was perhaps the speaker of the Russian parliament. Don't quote me on that. I'll double check. But a top official, let's just say, in Russia's government is threatening a nuclear retaliation after this supposed assassination attempt. So obviously, we need to talk about that. Also, Iran's president, Ibrahim Raisi, just another day at the office for him, I guess, threatening Israel's demise and using that word, but also visiting Syria, meeting with Bashar al-Assad, major prophetic implications there, of course. But the key takeaway, I think, Raisi used this phrase today, and he's been using it over the past several weeks, and it's in the thumbnail for this newscast today. He talked about a new world order, NWO. You might remember that wrestling tag team back we're talking about the 80s, the late 90s, the NWO. But in all seriousness, that's a term that's been thrown around, obviously, much further than that. When you talk about a new world order, many probably think of the Great Reset. We just did that TBN special that I hosted about the Great Reset and basically a fundamental transformation of the world, a socialistic one world government, digital currency, digital ID, no mention of God. That's the Great Reset philosophy and agenda. Many have called it the New World Order. Now they're calling it the Great Reset. I don't believe that is what Ibrahim Raisi, Iran's president, is referencing when he talks about a New World Order. What I believe he's talking about is a new anti-Western order. I've called it the Gathering Storm Coalition. He calls it the New World Order. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea, Venezuela, Belarus, anti-Western actors coming together. He calls it a New World Order. And I guess it is in some way, in that it is dictatorships, tyrannies, anti-Western, anti-Israel joining forces in these tumultuous times in which we live. So we want to talk more about that. Also, as if there wasn't enough going on already with an assassination attempt, supposedly, against Russian President Vladimir Putin, with talk of a new world order, well, we've got over 100 rockets. It's a lot, folks. It's not just a volley of 8 rockets, which is bad enough and lethal enough. Over 100 rockets launched out of Gaza by Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the two Iranian terror proxies, over really an under 48-hour span. Now, there's a shaky ceasefire right now between Israel and these terror forces, but who knows how long that will last. As we've reported here many times on the newscast, it flares up out of Gaza in southern Israel on a regular basis, and it continues to be, the Gaza situation, a thorn in Israel's side. What I mean by the Gaza situation is Hamas ruling the Gaza Strip and ruling an impoverished citizenry there with an iron fist. And secondly, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, another Iranian proxy, operating freely out of the Strip. And of course, the people there suffer. That's the way it goes under tyrannies, sadly. And that's what we have in Gaza right now. And it is a constant flow of rockets and terror out of this tiny coastal enclave against against a tiny nation, Israel, which, a reminder, is the size of the state of New Jersey and which is surrounded on all sides by the likes of Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, the various Iran-backed Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and further south, we have the Houthis in Yemen. We've called it the Ring of Fire that surrounds Israel, and Gaza is one ring of that larger ring of fire that seems to ignite on a regular basis. So we need to talk about that as well. Also, some very interesting news about Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC for short. Now, they're the elite vanguard, as I call them, of the Iranian regime. I've compared them to the Nazi SS, who were an elite group very close to Adolf Hitler. Well, the Revolutionary Guards Corps answers only to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran. And they've got great influence, folks, beyond just ideology and beyond a military sense. As you're about to find out, we're going to rattle that off for you today as well. So we've got a lot to talk about. And what are the prophetic implications about all this? Hey, at the end of the day, I think what sets us apart at the Watchman Newscast, the Watchman TV show on TBN, is we're giving it to you not just from a secular, here's the news, but we're giving you that. And on the ground perspective, we're in the Middle East, we're in Israel on a frequent basis, obviously reporting from on the ground, but we're giving it to you from a biblical perspective. At the end of the day, that's the key point here, folks, is, we're not just walking around with and reading what's going on and happening and saying the sky is falling and, oh my Lord, oh my word. No. We're giving it to you from a biblical perspective. What does the Bible say about this? What's the big picture? What does it mean prophetically? And that's the key. So if you haven't subscribed to the Watchman News channel right here on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. It's absolutely free, of course. Also click the notification bell so you get alerts every time a new video is posted. Call to action here. We are at 596,000 subscribers, just 4,000 away from 600,000. We are getting very close, folks, to 600K. It feels like just yesterday we were announcing 500,000, 500K. And I don't say that to boast. No. This is all God. This is a channel. I say it's by God and for God. And that's how we look at it. We serve at the pleasure of the King, King Jesus. And that's why we do what we do. So we're just blessed and just thrilled to see the growth and see how God is expanding the territory of the channel for such a time as this, because obviously it is sorely needed. Hey, speaking real quick of expanding territory, you might see this shirt real quick, the Watchman with Erick Stakelbeck. Now, we teased this a few weeks ago on the live stream. The Watchman shop is now open. We've got some Watchman merch by popular demand. People have been asking for a long time. Hey, how about some T-shirts, hats that say the Watchman and never hold your peace? Well, we've got them now. We've got T-shirts, caps, got some here actually, and mugs, pardon me as I bend down to grab them. Now, the hat's pretty cool, I have to say, and the mug as well. And we've got some stickers that you can kind of, how people today, my kids do it. They have these kind of large coffee, I don't even know what we call them, flasks, hydro flasks, and you put a sticker on them. And so you can put a Watchman sticker on them as well. So cool stuff. The mug, tumbler cups, my producer Daniel says. So we got the mug, we got the hat, and I'm kind of like Ron Burgundy. You ever see Anchorman with the hat? The TV hair. You can't mess the hair up when you're on TV. I will throw the hat on afterwards, though, I promise. But I love this hat, actually. Very cool. And if you like it, you can go to shop.tbn.org/Watchman. Folks, real simple. It's a fun thing to do for all of our subscribers and followers and viewers. We thought it'd be pretty cool. And also, it enables you to support the channel. Hey, it helps keep us afloat. Unfortunately, it's not free to have a internationally broadcast TV show and a very large YouTube channel as well. So you're showing your support for the channel and getting behind us in that way as well. We appreciate it. Again, you see the URL. I think, Daniel, we've thrown it up, shop.tbn.org/Watchman. And we will have more merch coming soon. After this first batch that we're putting out here, we have more and some different choices coming too. So we think you'll like that. But hey, if you like it, check it out. And I hope you do, because again, we've been having a lot of folks asking for some time about having Watchman merch. So now you have it. Hope you like it. Be careful what you wish for. Just kidding. So good to have you with us today. Okay, let's get into it. Let's get it. And it's in the description, by the way. If you want to pick up the merch, check it out. It's in the description on this video. So just go to the description under this video and you can find more there. Okay. What do we start with? I believe we start with Russia and what is going on there. And this is big news, folks. Look, you might say many people are just dismissing it and saying it was obviously a Russian hoax. I've heard the term false flag flown around, and there's a very good chance of that. But people are dismissing it out of hand and then kind of moving on without saying, wait a minute, now what? Russia, it's not just reportedly or, hey, an observer, a bystander saw it or a newspaper reported it. No, the Russian government, the top of the top Russian officials are saying this, declaring this to the world, that Ukraine attempted to assassinate the Russian leader, Vladimir Putin. So we have to take this seriously. How would the United States respond? How would any nation respond, really, if there was an assassination attempt on its leader's life and that nation claimed to know who was behind the assassination attempt? You would expect a fierce response. Well, what we have right now is Russia claiming, keyword there, claiming a Ukrainian assassination attempt against Vladimir Putin. Russia has to respond in a forceful manner, right? You would think. Vladimir Putin wants to project strength. That's his MO. So he's just going to take an attempt on his life and just move on and not retaliate? Folks, I highly doubt it. And perhaps that's the reason, if this is a Russian trick, a Russian hoax, perhaps that was the very reason, the very pretext that the Vladimir Putin's regime wanted. Hey, now we can go all in. Now we can say, hey, they tried to assassinate me. Let's crush Ukraine. Let's throw everything but the kitchen sink at them. I find it unlikely that Ukraine's government, or really any government, would take this move against Russia and bring the wrath of Putin's regime down upon them. Remember, look, Russia taking licks in the battlefield, of course, in this war, heavy losses. It has not gone well, but Russia is still a nuclear powerhouse, the world's largest arsenal of nuclear weapons. So a nation's going to think twice before they attempt the assassination of the Russian leader. That's common sense. Ukraine knows that if they tried such a bold maneuver, that there would be a heavy price to pay. Most likely, Russia would respond with overwhelming force. So I find it unlikely that Ukraine would do that. And I also find it unlikely because Kyiv, the Ukrainian capital, is hundreds and hundreds of miles from Moscow where this occurred. And by the way, I didn't mention at the top, in case you missed it, 2 drones were seen hovering outside the Kremlin in Moscow. Russia says they shot these drones down. It was outside of where Vladimir Putin would normally stay, I guess, in the Kremlin, according to Russia. Putin was not in the Kremlin at the time, also according to Russia, but it was overnight last night. These drones were shot out of the sky. I don't know, folks, call me crazy. Again, I'm not a military expert. I'm certainly not a drone expert or a military strategist, but it seems to me highly unlikely that these drones traveled hundreds of miles from Ukraine, crossed the Ukraine-Russia border, entered the airspace in Moscow, which is, I would think, is heavily guarded, especially during a time of war, and got within feet of the Kremlin before being shot down. I just find that highly unlikely. I call me crazy. So I don't think that's really an option here, that these drones traveled hundreds of miles over the Ukraine-Russia border into Moscow's airspace, into spitting distance. You've probably seen the video. We'll show it tomorrow on the newscast. Within spitting distance of the Kremlin. So that's option number one. That probably didn't happen. Now, number 2, was there a Ukraine sympathizer in Moscow, who within Moscow, closer to the Kremlin, who sent these drones? Perhaps, but man, oh man, I still find it very hard to believe these drones would get so close to the Kremlin. They were shot down, but come on. And number 3, and perhaps the most likely option here, folks, let's be honest, this was Russia doing this. Russia, kind of staging this as a pretext to unleash hell on Ukraine. So we need more, obviously, more details. And Ukraine denies they were involved, of course, and we need more details. That's my early take. And again, this news just broke a few hours ago. That's the early take. We need more details, obviously, and more background. We've seen the footage, obviously, of these drones entering the airspace. Again, a stone's throw, shadowing the Kremlin before they were shot down. So what do you think? I'd love to hear your comments. And remember, a reminder, we do have a Q&A session at the end of today's newscast, last 15 minutes or so, I guess. So send along your questions about this. Why should we take this seriously? Some in the West will just scoff and say, it was Putin just staging the whole thing. And perhaps, yes, it was, but it doesn't end now. I hope people understand. This is a major, major incident, supposed incident, that Russia's going to use. And they say, here's our moment. Hey, they tried to kill Putin. We have to respond. And you can't blame us. Look, there was an assassination attempt against our leader. So you can't blame us for responding with overwhelming force and carpet bombing Ukrainian cities. As I said, a top Russian official in the Russian parliament said in a fury, said we should have a nuclear response. We should wield a nuclear response here. And again, Western leaders, and we've talked about this on previous live streams where we can really expound on this in a bit, folks. Western leaders are they willfully blind, naive, foolish in thinking they keep saying the goal is to defeat Russia. Do they really think that Russia's going to go quietly into the night? Look, Vladimir Putin's an evil man. He's not going to go quietly into the night. He's not going to accept defeat in Ukraine. It's not going to happen. He's not going out without a fight. And by a fight, I mean, we said earlier, I hate to put it in these terms, everything but the kitchen sink, his entire military arsenal, including, yes, perhaps, and I hate to even say this, God forbid, tactical nuclear weapons, a battlefield nuclear weapon. Is that beyond the realm of possibility? I don't think so. I don't think, folks, this is time and time again from Putin, Medvedev, other top Russian leaders, nuclear saber rattling. I don't think it's just saber rattling. Again, many in the West do. Many of our geniuses inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C., many Western leaders in Europe and the U.S., say, no, he wouldn't do that. He's not crazy. He's not stupid. He wouldn't do that. Ask yourself this. If Vladimir Putin felt like his back was totally against the wall, if he felt like, say there's a Ukrainian counteroffensive, let's say Ukrainian forces cross the border into Russia, is he really going to just take that on the chin and not respond with everything he has? Why? Because there's two options here, folks. If Russia is defeated, I mean defeated on the battlefield, and by the way, reportedly Russia has already lost over 100,000 Russian soldiers. If he's defeated, we're on the way to a conventional, keyword there, conventional defeat. There's either a coup and he's overthrown and sent into exile, or he's killed in a coup. There's no third way forward for old Vlad. If Russia loses on the battlefield in Ukraine, there's not a third way. In my view, there's just not a third view. Either he's overthrown, sent into exile, imprisoned, or he is killed. Now, put yourself in his shoes. By the way, he's 70 years old and thought to be in not so good health. What do you think he's going to do? Is he just going to take it on the chin and accept the defeat? Or is he going to fight tooth and nail viciously to preserve not only his leadership, but his life? And that's where the possibility of a tactical nuclear weapon being used comes in. If his back's against the wall, he thinks he could be overthrown or killed even, what's he going to do? So I think Western leaders, to not consider that option, are very naive and not seeing the full picture, which brings us back to today before we move on to the New World Order. That's the phrase used by Iran's president. We got to break that down. But it brings us back to today. Could today be used as a pretext for Russia just to unleash on Ukraine in a way it hasn't yet since this war broke out, since Russia invaded in February 2022. Keep commenting, folks. I'm not seeing your comments right now for some reason, but let's see if I can pull them up. Sorry, as I'm looking here. Sorry for the shaky laptop as I'm trying to scroll, but I can't. Okay. Well, I'll see the question. Yeah, maybe I will refresh. My trusty producer Daniel just said in my ear. But we will have your questions, so never fear.
Freedom Boat Club makes voting
Sorry for that. Here we go. Now I have your chat because I want to see what everyone is saying. Brandon says, I stand with Russia. So Brandon, one comment, and there's not a last name there. And thanks for joining us. Okay, you stand with Russia. Think what you want about Zelensky. You don't have to be a Zelensky fan, needless to say, to oppose what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin, who's aligned himself with America's greatest enemies, Israel's greatest enemies, the greatest enemies of Christianity, whether it's North Korea, China, Iran, the world's three biggest persecutors of Christianity. And I don't know where you lie, Brandon, if you're a believer. Do you really think Vladimir Putin is a follower of Jesus and a Christian who practices his faith and who really walks the walk of faith? Come on. Let's get serious. So that's what I think it really boils down to for any Christians who say they're behind Vladimir Putin. Think what you want about Ukraine, the Ukrainian government. I get it. But that's a diversion when we're talking about Putin. When I say Vladimir Putin's an evil man, people right away, his defenders, want to change the subject. But what about Zelensky? What about Ukraine? We're talking about Vladimir Putin. You're defending him and saying you support him. Why? You know that he's aligned with China, North Korea, and Iran, and you're supporting him. So I think that's always pretty relevant to bring up. And we didn't even talk about the prophetic implications, which we will talk about towards the end of the newscast. But let's move on to Iran and Ibrahim Raisi visiting Syria today. Very important. The man known as the Butcher of Tehran, Ibrahim Raisi, the Iranian president, meeting with Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian dictator. I mentioned yesterday, watch Syria. Not just yesterday, I've been mentioning for the past several years, watch Syria in terms of prophetic things, prophetic events unfolding. Syria more and more seems to be a very, very likely spot for some major prophetic happenings. And we see it more and more. It's the focus of Iran and Russia. Everyone has, hey, the Ezekiel invasion force, as we call them, that latter days invasion force that the prophet Ezekiel describes in the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, they have set up shop already in Syria. They are perched at Israel's northeastern border right now. I'm talking in specific, Russia, Iran, and Turkey. And by the way, all three of those powers have held meetings recently. Officials from Russia, Iran, Turkey, and Syria have met in the past week. And the goal here is to get Turkey and Syria on the same page. Now, Erdogan's regime and the Assad regime in Syria have been at loggerheads for the past decade plus, ever since the Syrian civil war broke out. Erdogan, remember, his AKP party in Turkey is the Turkish branch, essentially, of the Muslim Brotherhood. Well, in Syria, Assad was cracking down on the Brotherhood. He and his Iran-aligned friends, Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, were fighting against the Brotherhood, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. Pick them there, folks. Two sides of the same evil coin. Yes, different ideologically, theologically in some ways, but at the end of the day, two sides of the jihadist coin. If you have the Iranian regime and Hezbollah on one side, Shia jihadis, and on the other side, the Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS. Assad aligned with the Shia jihadis. Erdogan aligned with the Sunni jihadis. So they don't like each other very much. And they've, again, been at odds for a decade plus. But Russia and Iran, who are friendly with the Assad regime in Syria and also friendly with Turkey, are trying to bring the two sides together. And we shall see if that succeeds. But they are working diligently to do just that. And by the way, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, in my view, I'd love to hear what you think. I know there's differing viewpoints here. They are the three main forces in that Ezekiel invasion force laid out in Ezekiel 38 and 39. But Syria could be the staging ground. Make sense? Ezekiel talks about the mountains of Israel. And look, the mountains of Israel, you think of the Golan, you have the Israeli side of the Golan, you have the Syrian side of the Golan as well over the border. So it seems that Syria would be a staging ground, perhaps, for this invasion force to come through and to move against Israel, especially because there are already thousands of Russian troops in Syria. There's Iranian regime minions, Hezbollah minions in Syria as well. And we have Turkish troops in Syria too. So it seems that it could be the perfect staging ground for that Ezekiel invasion. The bad news, and I hate to inform, actually, I'm glad to inform this Ezekiel invasion force, they don't get very far. Reread it, folks. I'm not going to quote verbatim. Go ahead and reread that this invasion force perishes on the mountains of Israel when the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, intervenes. And he's got something to say about the plans that are being laid against his people and his land. So reread Ezekiel 38 and 39. But that's the situation right now in Syria. Let's pull up Raisi's comments that I mentioned, the New World Order. Let's pull it up real quick. And I want to quote verbatim exactly what he said. This is Ibrahim Raisi, the man known as the Butcher of Tehran, and for good reason. In the late 1980s in particular, he worked in Iran's judiciary, and he was apparently behind the deaths of thousands of Iranian political dissidents who were protesting against this wicked regime. Now he's Iran's president. How nice. And some people, or maybe not, and some people say that if and when Khamenei, the Iranian supreme leader, passes on, soon, perhaps. There's also been cancer rumors swirling around him that Raisi could even be a candidate for supreme leader. He's very close to Khamenei. But here is what Raisi said. Now, I'm going to just quote directly for you. Raisi says, Iran's, and I quote, I'm looking down at my phone, pardon me as I look away for a minute, Iran's power today is within the country, and Iran's power in the region is of an unmistakable magnitude, boasting and gloating. The first blunder, Raisi says, made by the Zionist entity, Israel, will be its last. And there will no longer be this thing called the Zionist entity to even take another step. We have said and announced this in various forums, so we've noticed. And they know, Israel, very well that we are serious about this view, about destroying Israel and this decision. Wow. Today, he continued, this is all very eloquent stuff, or not. The circumstances, but this is important in all seriousness, folks. Raisi says, today the circumstances are pivoting in favor of the resistance, that's Iran and its proxies, and against the Zionist entity. Day after day, the Zionist entity is heading toward its demise. And he noted the, quote, unprecedented political situation in Israel, the deep societal rift. Love to hear comments on all that. But what he is saying is that, number one, and this grieves me to hear that Israel's enemies are observing all of the madness going on right now in Israel, the political upheaval and the internal dissension, and they're becoming emboldened by it. And they're salivating at the thought of a divided Israel. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Now, Bibi Netanyahu, Yoav Gallant, the defense minister in Israel, other Israeli leaders have said, hey, yes, we're internally divided right now, we're squabbling, but when it comes to external threats, we're certainly on the same page. But Iran is just seeing the massive protests right now in Israel. And again, they're becoming emboldened. And you see Raisi's comments. Israel cannot stand up against us. He actually expanded more and said, look, you know, if we're stretching out a conflict against Israel over several weeks, Israel won't keep up and we will overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Raisi said that as well. He's had a lot to say recently, as you can tell. But he believes that Iran and its proxies will overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. Two things. Number one, I'll get to the New World Order comments in a minute. Number two, yesterday, the timing's interesting, right, of his comments. Yesterday, we had over 100 rockets launched out of Gaza against southern Israel. Thankfully, no Israelis were killed. Israel did respond with 16, we got an exact number there, 16 airstrikes against Hamas positions in Gaza. At least one Hamas member was killed. Hamas military installations were struck. But folks, it seems that Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, which was also firing rockets to Iranian proxies, it seems they're not getting the memo, because consistently, at least once a month, we're seeing these barrages out of Gaza. It remains a persistent thorn in Israel's side, these rocket barrages. Oh, I don't know, not to mention the terror tunnels that Hamas has dug under Gaza into southern Israel. So what does Israel do when it comes to Gaza? No easy answers there, because this thing keeps flaring up. And when Israel invariably responds, or inevitably responds, I should say, to protect its citizenry, what does the world do? It howls, and it howls some more, and it gnashes its teeth and blames Israel for all the madness going on there. By the way, a programming note, yesterday I interviewed Israel's ambassador to the UN. Gilad Erdan. That's coming up very soon here on the channel, also on the Watchman TV show on TBN. But Erdan is fearless, a fearless voice and advocate for the world's one and only Jewish state. Hey, walking into the lion's den, the belly of the beast every day at the UN. Could you imagine? That may be, I've said that Prime Minister, Israel's Prime Minister, that may be the toughest job, but perhaps the UN ambassador is even tougher in some respects. Because you're walking into a hostile body every single day. So I'm not going to put a pecking order, but let's just say that Erdogan has a very tough job. And whoever represents Israel at the UN has a very tough job. But Raisi thinks that the proxies will overwhelm Israel. And this is what Iran's been building towards, right? And we've documented this for years here in the newscast. This is why, folks, it doesn't take a brain surgeon to see. This is why Iran has equipped its proxies, armed them to the teeth. I've got the sheet with the numbers. How much, gosh, it's too far away. It's on the other side of the room from the studio. But I've got the numbers. We read them off on the newscast. Iran spends billions every year in arming and funding Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, also the Assad regime. Folks, I mean billions, 700 million to Hezbollah alone. So they're all in. And they've surrounded Israel on all sides. I call it the Ring of Fire. Hezbollah has at least 150,000. Count them. Rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of Israel. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, tens of thousands of rockets. Who knows what the Houthis have, how much they have. The Shia militias in Iraq and Syria armed to the teeth as well. Rockets, attack drones. That's the Ring of Fire. And Raisi is saying that when we activate this Ring of Fire, we're going to overwhelm Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. We're going to overwhelm Israel, and Israel can't stand against it. If we fire off rockets and missiles and drones over a prolonged period of time, say 30, 40, 50, 60 days, Israel can't withstand it. That's their view. That's what they've been building towards and building up. And now they're there. In their view, they are there, and Israel is internally divided right now, in their view. Well, yes, Israel, not just in their view, Israel is internally divided in many ways, obviously, but in their view, Israel's vulnerable because of that internal division. Again, Israel's leaders are saying otherwise, but Iran and its proxies are saying, no, 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 it's getting close to time for us to strike. And Iran's foreign minister, as we reported on the newscast a few days ago, talk about boldness, folks. He was on the Israel-Lebanon border, overlooking Israel. He was along with Lebanese and Hezbollah officials perched on that Lebanon-Israel border, and he declared that Israel would soon meet its demise. Surprise, surprise. And just kind of chilling, because I've stood on that border many times. On the Israeli side, of course. I'm not very welcome, I don't think, in southern Lebanon. Maybe I'll wear the Watchman t-shirt in southern Lebanon and say hello to Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, or maybe not. But on the Israeli side, which is absolutely beautiful, by the way, towns like Metula, right along the border, I've spent a lot of time there filming. You've seen it here on the newscast. And he was right there, the foreign minister of Iran, along with Hezbollah. And folks, look, filming on that Israel-Lebanon border, we have been, the Watchman crew, the Watchman team, we have been filmed by Hezbollah. We've seen Hezbollah operatives filming us, filming the border area. In particular, when we went into a Hezbollah tunnel not too long ago with the Israel Defense Forces. So they are there. They are it's obvious they're there. They are not really trying to hide. And the homes that dot the countryside of southern Lebanon, which is beautiful. It's a beautiful area, by the way, up in the mountains. Those homes, sadly, mostly against their wills, civilians who live there, Hezbollah has stockpiled their homes with rockets and missiles and using them essentially as weapons depots right across the border, a few hundred yards from northern Israel. But that's where Abdollahian, the Iranian foreign minister, visited last Friday. Raisi, New World Order. What do you think, by the way? Could Israel be overwhelmed? I don't think so. I think Israel, look, folks, I'm not a military strategist or a former general, but I've talked to enough of them in Israel and the United States and Europe and elsewhere, in the Middle East, Arab nations as well, to know that, man, when a threat is gathering, an existential threat, it's a good bet that a nation will probably act preemptively against that threat. And we've talked about the trigger for this great northern war, as we've called it here in the newscast, and this ring of fire being ignited. We know it's going to happen eventually, sadly. I've called it the Great Northern War because the bulk of the action, I believe, will take place to Israel's north, in Syria, in Lebanon. But Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and most likely the Houthis in Yemen will also throw their hats in the ring and get involved and try to open up multiple fronts. Folks, we saw a dry run of sorts, right? Last month, around Passover, when Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, all three of those rings of the larger ring of fire ignited and rockets were launched out of those three areas into Israel. But does that ring of fire ignite? Anything could spark it, really, right? In the Middle East, expect the unexpected. The seemingly most minor incident could spark a regional war. That's how it works. Expect the unexpected, not only in the Middle East, of all places, of course, but in these prophetic times that we're living right now, where the world is kind of walking on a tightrope right now, it feels, right? And for me personally, I'm just clinging on to the Lord Jesus, clinging on to the hem of his robe and saying, Lord, I don't know where this is going, but lead me. I will follow you wherever you go, wherever you take me, you lead, I'll follow. I serve at the pleasure of the King, as I said at the top. And I hope everyone watching has that philosophy. You're not frightened and worried. Oh, my word, what's going to happen? There's going to be a war in Israel. God's in control, okay? If you've read the Bible and if you read it cover to cover, you know how this ends, and you know that God is in control and that there will be a reckoning for Israel's enemies. But what ignites that great northern war? Is it it could be a smaller incident, or could it be something bigger? Could it be an Israeli airstrike against Iran's nuclear facilities? And again, I'm not a military strategist. I've never claimed to be. But it would seem to make sense from an Israeli perspective. And we've discussed this on the live stream before. It would seem to make sense that if you were going to preemptively strike Iran's nuclear weapons program, perhaps you should also strike Hezbollah. Because you know that if and when, I think it's probably a matter of when, especially with Netanyahu in office, he's focused like a laser on Iran, and perhaps to the detriment of what's happening in Gaza right now. Perhaps many are saying, hey, he should take a harder line right now against Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Is he distracted by Iran? Good question. Who knows? There's internal dissension, obviously, as we've talked about. Who knows? But the Gaza situation has really become a consistent thorn in Israel's side. Not become, it's been for over a decade plus. But the bigger picture he's looking at is certainly Iran. He's fixated on it. He sees himself, does Bibi, as a Churchillian figure. Winston Churchill saw the gathering storm of Nazi Germany. The world laughed at him. He was proven right. Benjamin Netanyahu for years has been warning about the gathering storm of a nuclear Iran. The world has said, no, you're an alarmist. We want to deal with Iran and give them billions of dollars and appease them. You're being mean, Bibi. But he was right. And he believes that the reason he is back in office again is to deal with Iran. So when that happens, presumably when he's in office, that there's a good chance it's going to happen. No guarantees, of course, but there's a chance. He's talked about it often that Israel could eventually take preemptive action against Iran's nuclear program. There's a good chance. Let's just say that. There's a good chance. No guarantees. He may not be in office in a few weeks. His coalition could collapse. We don't know. But we do know that he is someone who means business, it very much seems, when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. Hezbollah has some 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at every inch of the world's one and only Jewish state. They are Iran's most lethal proxy. Iran has held Hezbollah largely in reserve since 2006 and that last war between Israel and Hezbollah. You would think that Iran, if at any time Iran was going to unleash Hezbollah against Israel, that would be the time. If Israel strikes Iran's nuclear program, wow, that would be the time where Iran retaliates through Hezbollah. Rarely does the Iranian regime retaliate directly. Have you noticed that, by the way? It's usually through Hamas, Hezbollah, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, whoever. Rarely do they respond directly. So you would think they'd activate Hezbollah, Hamas. And again, you saw a dry run for this a few weeks ago. Syria, Gaza, Lebanon were all activated. And there were projectiles launched almost simultaneously over a 48-hour span from all three corners there of the Ring of Fire. So Israel knowing, man, when we hit Iran, clearly they're going to activate the Ring of Fire, and Hezbollah finally might come off, not that they've been on the sidelines, they're active, but in a major way. And I mean thousands of rockets a day, that kind of major way out of that arsenal. If Israel knows that's coming against the North, and that Hezbollah, you would think perhaps Israel would preemptively strike Hezbollah. If Israel's going all in and they're going to strike Iran's nuclear facilities, they've made the decision, we're doing it. And we know Hezbollah is going to react. Would Israel possibly do both? Is Israel capable of doing both? Hitting Hezbollah, to really weakening Hezbollah severely and striking the nuclear facilities? Is it a prolonged campaign against Iran's nuclear program? And remember, folks, it's not like 1981, Iraq's nuclear reactor, which Israel took out, the Osiris reactor under Saddam Hussein, or 2007, Bashar al-Assad's reactor in Syria. It was, look, one reactor in both cases. These Iranian nuclear facilities are spread out across what is a very vast country. Look at Iran on the map, a very vast and mountainous country, and many are hardened and buried deep underground. It's not just kind of bang, bang, and we're out of here. Did anyone see the movie Top Gun Maverick? A good flick. Surprisingly, it was non-political. It wasn't woke. It was actually patriotic. Imagine that. So it was nice to see that. It was a good movie. It was entertaining. Took the whole family. But I think that film, they never named the enemy. If you notice, if you haven't seen Top Gun Maverick, big hit, obviously, in 2022. They never named the enemy. But clearly, it was based on Iran's nuclear program. Tom Cruise, the other pilots, take out a nuclear reactor, a rogue regime's nuclear reactor, someplace overseas. But again, it was one reactor. Osiris in 81, that's a movie, but just to bring it up to make you think a little bit, because it's hot, it was just out in theaters. Osiris was one reactor, Syria one reactor, Iran is several, hardened deep underground. Now, the interesting thing about that, one of the many interesting and disturbing things, but an interesting point there is that the U.S. is sending bunker-busting bombs to the Middle East. It's going to equip the A-10 Warthog aircraft with these bunker busters. Now, clearly a message to Iran, but you just know the Biden administration is not going to use them against Iran's nuclear program. Let's take a poll. Who here watching right now, and I'm not getting political, I got scolded in the comments, leave Biden alone. And I don't sit here and Biden bash every newscast. You guys know that. But from time to time, I'm critical of his administration's foreign policy for good reason. So look, if a Republican president does things I disagree with, I'm going to call him out. We are equal opportunity caller outers, if that's a phrase, here on the newscast. It just so happens that Joe Biden is in the White House right now and driving our foreign policy. So, of course, if there are things I don't agree with about that, I'm going to say it. And that's why you watch The Watchman, not to hear me hold my peace and mince words. And I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not taking pot shots and being disrespectful. I'm calling it like it is. And let's take a poll. Does anyone believe, watching right now, that the Biden administration would take action against Iran's nuclear program? Or will this be Israel going it alone? What do you think? I'm just curious. We can talk about it during the Q&A, which is upon us right now. Actually, we need to get to the Q&A. But what do you think? In all honesty, it would take, listen, I'll leave you with this thought. There have been at least 78 Iranian or Iranian-sponsored attacks against U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria since Joe Biden took office in January 2021. 78 at least. The Biden administration has responded 3 times. 3 out of 78 with airstrikes along the Iraq-Syria border. Clearly, they weren't enough to deter Iran from taking further action, because about a month ago, we saw Iran send drones against a U.S. base in Syria. 1 U.S. citizen, a contractor, was killed, and at least 6 U.S. soldiers were wounded. So Iran's watching all this unfold and saying, well, we keep attacking them, and they're not really doing much in response. Oh, and at the same time, the Biden administration wants to revive the Iran nuclear deal, which would gift wrap us with billions of dollars in sanctions relief, which, as I mentioned earlier, I don't know, $700 million to Hezbollah, a few hundred million to Hamas, Islamic Jihad. You know where that sanctions relief is going that the U.S. would supply. So Iran's saying they don't react. They want to give us money and strike a deal. So they're not going to use bunker busters against us. Yeah, they're flexing their muscles and it's a show of strength, but they're not actually going to use them. That's what the regime thinks. Folks, I'm telling you right now, they believe that they are going to help push the United States out of the Middle East once and for all. That's the Iranian regime's belief. And they don't like the prospect of U.S. bunker busters in their backyard, clearly in the Middle East. But the mullahs don't believe that the current occupant in the White House and the current administration is actually going to follow through and use them. And that's one reason Iran is becoming more bold against Israel, because they believe that Israel will be less likely as well to carry out a strike against Iran if Israel is so divided internally, number one, and number two, because of the ring of fire that surrounds Israel. Iran is daring Israel right now. They're saying, your big buddy, the United States, is weakened. They're not relevant in the region anymore. You are weakened internally, and you're surrounded by our proxies. So the Iranian regime is gloating, and they're crowing about it, and they feel really good right now. But I would caution the mullahs in Tehran to read the book of Psalms. Just a reminder, folks, to encourage you yet again, hey, throughout Psalms, there's several occasions where it is very clear, and I'm using the words, quoting directly, God laughs. God sees Israel's enemies plotting and planning and devising schemes and back rooms, and he quite literally laughs. God Almighty will have something to say about the Iranian regime when it's all said and done. And a reminder on that note to pray for the people of Iran, who are the main victims of this wicked regime, who are under the heel of this regime now for 44 years. So keep the people of Iran in your prayers. Did you know that the fastest growing church in the world is in Iran right now? You can't stop the gospel. Ladies and gentlemen, no matter how much every tyrant and dictator throughout history has tried to crush the gospel, crush the followers of Jesus, you can't stop the gospel. And you're seeing that in Iran, once again, the world's fastest growing church, and you see it in China as well. Okay, we got to get to questions. New World Order, NWO, Hall, Nash, Hogan, and Ibrahim Raisi talking about the NWO. Now, I said this at the top, but one last mention. He keeps talking in several speeches over the past few weeks about a new world order. And his version of a new world order is not the Klaus Schwab Great Reset version. The Iranian version of a new world order is a world where the U.S. is weakened. That's the bottom line, where the U.S. And the West are no longer the leaders of the free world and no longer the main influences and main driving forces in the world, economically, militarily, in every way. That's his version, the Iranian regime's version of a new world order. It involves a coalescence of anti-Western and anti-Israel regimes led by what I've called the Gathering Storm Coalition: Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea. That's his version of a new world order and a new world alignment, a new alignment of power, shifting to the east away from the west. You can throw Turkey in the mix as well. You might say, what? Turkey's a NATO member. Folks, under the radical rule of Recep Erdogan, Turkey is more like NATO in name only. And it's made a shift to the east and then some. Speaking of Erdogan, coming up, I believe May 14th next week is the Turkish election. What's going to happen there? Many think he will lose that election. Number one, will he even allow that to happen? And number two, will he go quietly into the night if that does happen? And just a quick note here, Erdogan has been suffering some health problems in recent weeks. So watch Turkey. Certainly watch what happens next week with this Turkish election. We will definitely be reporting on that here on the newscast. Okay, let's go to questions and let's see what we have. And I'm sure they're good because I got to say, we have one of the most informed audiences, I have to tell you. Devin D. Horton asks, Eric, what is your testimony? Devin, do you have about an hour? A full hour? I have quite a testimony. Here's a teaser for you, Devin, and for the thousands of people watching right now. I was nearly killed twice in acts of violence on the streets of Philadelphia where I grew up. I've got a .22 caliber bullet in my hip still, and I spent a week in intensive care when I was beaten half to death with a baseball bat. Do I have your attention? Those are some of the major points in my testimony in my walk with the Lord. So one day I will share my full testimony, perhaps on a live stream, on the TV show, the newscast. We got to do it because, folks, what good is a good testimony for the Lord if you don't share it? My main purpose in life is to bring people into the kingdom. And if my testimony can do that, I want to share it for everyone. So not because of, oh, wow, look at me, but because I want everyone to know, watching right now, everyone around the world to know what God has done for me and what following Jesus has done for me in my life. That's everything. So I want everyone to know, if he could do it for me, he could do it for you for such a time as this. And if you don't know Jesus yet, get to know him, because time is short. Don't put it off to next week. Well, when I finish school or I get married, then I'll start following Jesus. No, come as you are now, and he will transform you from the inside out. Trust me, it'll be the greatest decision you ever made in your life. Every day when you wake up will be an adventure. You will never look back. You will be a new creation in Christ, born again. Yeah, you really can be born again and become a new creation in Christ. The old things pass away. You become a new creation in the Lord Jesus. Okay, more questions. Melissa Resnick. Melissa, you've always got good questions. Thanks for joining us again. You got a few here. This is a good one. Melissa asks, do you think Israel will remain quiet concerning the attack on the Kremlin today? I know they try to proceed with caution due to Russia and Syria. Yeah, Melissa, I'd be shocked if Israel said anything about this, especially because, look, it's likely that this drone didn't come from Ukraine, cross the border, the Ukraine-Russia border, basically cross into Moscow's airspace, get yards, if that, from the Kremlin before being shot down. That's probably unlikely. Could it have been a Ukrainian sympathizer on the ground in Moscow? I suppose. But in your view, what's the most likely outcome, folks, really, about what all went down? Was this really an assassination attempt against Vladimir Putin? Perhaps it was. I'm not discounting that. We don't know enough yet. But I think, considering the source, the regime of Putin, we have to have these discussions. I would be surprised, Melissa, if Israel weighed in on that, because it's so murky right now still, too. The big question, as I said earlier, how does Russia respond now? Or use as a pretext, I should say, for a response. Melissa also asks, If Itamar Ben-Gvir leaves his position in Israel's government, do you think it could cause the current Israeli government to fail and cause another election? Melissa, I don't really want to say this. Am I going to say this? Perhaps, perhaps if someone pulls out, could the coalition collapse? I guess so. Perhaps. Man, Israel has had 5 elections in the past 4 years. For anyone saying Israel's not a democracy, it's an apartheid state, it's a fascist state, really? 5 elections in 4 years sounds pretty free and democratic to me. But could it? Yes, yes. It seems as strong as the coalition is, it's a right-wing coalition in that sense. In a sense, it could be kind of fragile in that Israel, there's obviously a lot of political upheaval in the country right now, an internal divide, but there are some mercurial, how's that? Check out your dictionary, mercurial characters and figures in this Israeli government, including Itamar Ben-Gvir. So, man, oh man, anything, expect the unexpected, Melissa. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. Okay. Stephen, is it Guzia? Shalom. Well, shalom to you, Stephen. How effective are bunker busting bombs? How deep can they go into the earth? Stephen, I actually don't know, but they are very, I think of just track record, Afghanistan and Iraq. We had the Moab. Does anyone remember the mother of all bombs? The Moab caused, major, major damage in bombing Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan and also targeting ISIS there as well, if not mistaken. So these bunker busting bombs are pretty darn effective and pretty lethal. The exact specifications, how far underground they can go, I don't know off the top of my head, but we can do a little research there because it's definitely worth noting and talking about now that they're in the Middle East. Will they be used by the U.S.? I don't think so under the current administration against Iran, but they are there. Okay, let's see. Woodland metal detecting. Hello. How far do you think we are from becoming a cashless society as it relates to our God's word? Well, a few things here. Number one, Woodland. I just covered this in the Great Reset special. We talk all about this. I think you'll find it interesting. For a full hour, it was called What is the Great Reset? And it was a 1 hour special that I hosted. It's here on the Watchman YouTube channel. So go to specials, that category here, and you'll find it. What is the Great Reset? It aired on April 17th. You can also find it under the newscast category. How soon to a cashless society? We might be sooner than we think. The Biden administration right now is experimenting with digital currency, and there's rumblings about that. The world would love it. Many in the world, China would love a cashless society. So we may not be that far off. That's not alarmism, sensationalism. We may not be that far off from a cashless society. And as it relates to God's word, listen, the Antichrist, it seems that there's a very good chance that he will, when he steps in to control this one world system, how do you control? There's got to be one currency, right? One global currency. A digital currency is a very easy way to do that and to monitor and track people. Gone are the days where you could hide from a regime, hide a few $1,000s, a few $100 under your mattress. No, if there's no cash, they can seize your bank account. They, meaning the elites and any regime, totalitarian regime in power. So great question there. Folks, we got to go. Believe it or not, it's been an hour. Hey, reminder, if you like the shirt, you like the hat, the mug, shop.tbn.org/Watchman. And you can check out some Watchman merch. We'd love, hey, just in time for the summer, we'd love for you guys to rock some Watchman merch. And the main thing is you support the channel and you help keep us afloat, help keep us on the air. We've got the YouTube channel. We've got the TV show. So unfortunately, it's not free to be on these major platforms. And we appreciate your support. Hey, and they're cool looking shirts. My 12-year-old daughter said they're cool, so I know they're cool. She said they look good. Thanks so much for joining us here today on the Watchman Newscast live stream. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.